Okay, so I am recording, but I'll go ahead and do a countdown so that I know where to cut. Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk. I believe this is episode 199.
Oh,
And today my guest is my good friend and former neighbor, Bryan Falchuk.
hey
There's
Tony, how
a
you doing?
good. There's a good funny story on the whole neighbor thing. And today I am really excited because today we are chatting about his new book, published by Insurance Nerds.
Yeah,
This is not the first time that Bryan writes a book, but it's the first time he writes a book about insurance. So this is very exciting. So Bryan, tell me. Well, I guess I should share the name of the book. So Bryan's here to talk about his book, The Future of Insurance from Disruption to Evolution.
yes,
Lessons from insurers succeeding in a changing industry. So Bryan, tell me a little bit about your background.
yeah.
Uh,
So there's a reason why I'm writing a book about insurance, especially as you said, like that's not what my other books have been around. And funny enough, I shared my first book with you and Nick back in the early days of the show. So probably we wouldn't even be here today if not for talking about that other book.
mhm.
So aside from writing non-insurance books, I've actually been an insurance guy like forever. So I've been in the P&C space for over 20 years now, including time running claims for Hiscox, which is where we met when I was commuting down to Atlanta every week and had an apartment there. And you were right around the corner from me. And I creepily would look out my window and see you sitting at your computer. We don't, it was, yeah, it's nice to call it funny. It might've been scary at the time, but it's all
uh,
friendly.
so the what I will never forget is that we finished recording your first podcast appearance with Nick hosting, and about 45 seconds later, I get an email from Bryan saying, "Holy crap! I just realized we literally live in the same apartment building, same floor."
Yeah. I had
That
just
is
held the
just
door for you guys
yeah.
that morning coming from the parking lot. Yeah.
So we hadn't realized that until after we recorded that podcast episode.
Yeah. It was wild, small world. And then I would send you some creepy texts and emails when I would like see, I'm like, are you sitting at your computer right now? It looks like you are. Nice shirt. We could see each other. Our apartments were like kind of
Kitty corner,
diagonal from each
basically.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that aside, yeah, I've been in insurance for 20 years. As I said, most recently, my last role was running claims, but before that, I've done operations, distribution, a whole bunch of things. Started Liberty Mutual in a strategy role, worked across their business, went to McKinsey and worked in their P&C practice, so served a lot of other carriers. And then I went into the specialty space and worked at Beasley, spent a little bit of time at a med mal carrier, and then the role at Hiscox came up, and that was pretty amazing. So I've had a really cool run in insurance. And then while I was at Hiscox, I found out about, from sitting at a conference at lunch and networking with the guy next to me or catching up a bit, who was starting up this thing called an insure tech, which was a kind of new word at the time. And I was intrigued. And so, we talked some more and shared the idea with my team. And we were one of their first customers. It was something called Hi Marley. And as I got closer with the team there and they raised their Series A, they asked me to join and spend a year with them. So I went from the carrier side to the insure tech side. And it was in that role that actually the genesis for this book came to be. So I stepped back from full-time work at Hi Marley at the end of the year. Um, and so I could start to work on this book and some consulting and advisory work I've been doing. But it really is about this really unique moment that I think the industry is in today. And the conversations I had, being in a sales capacity in a tech startup serving the insurance vertical, like you get into a lot of conversations about where we are as an industry, the pressures we face, the constraints we have, how hard it is to innovate. And I just kept hearing the same sort of thing. And I decided someone needs to talk about this and maybe help paint the picture of how we can move forward, even though, we've got pressures on one side and constraints on the other. And I know we'll get into all that, but it was really like a 20-year buildup to needing to tell this story.
So I think one thing that's very interesting in your background is that you did the stint in insurtech, right? So
Yeah.
our insurance nerds last book that came out last year was Rob Galbraith's
The end of
end of
insurance as we
insurance,
know it. Yeah.
the end of insurance as we know it. And Rob is an insurance veteran from USAA,
Yeah.
but he wrote that book to help himself understand insurtech, right? He's never worked on the insurtech side, so I
Yeah.
love that this next book, from the insurance nurse perspective, different author, but I love that now we have the extra perspective, not only the insurance perspective, but also the having actually worked for
Yeah.
an insurtech. So you've
Yeah.
seen both sides, which
I have,
right?
and it matters, and I don't think I appreciated that beforehand, but it definitely rounded out my perspective. There's no question. And interacting with carriers from the position of the insurtech is different too. You know, the joke was like, I go to a conference and I don't have 20 dinners to choose from because I'm not like, you know, in the C-suite of a carrier where every vendor is like, oh, we'll take you to dinner. I'm the one who's trying to get people to go to dinner with me. But aside from that, like, it is different. The conversations are different. The things that you start to see is different. And maybe the best part of that and most valuable is I see it across, you know, when I left Hi Marley, I had something like 65 accounts that we were, you know, either in production with or moving through the pipeline pretty actively. So that's 65, 70 relationship. You know, there's more along the way that fell off, like let's say 100, 120 different carriers that I got pretty close to. You know, talking to them about the biggest things that they face, about the pressures they have, about what their customers are asking for, hearing about what their business mix is like. And it kind of reminded me of my consulting days, is you get that kind of, you know, industry-wide view. I was just getting it a lot more rapidly about a particular situation that I think is different from anything we faced before.
I don't think you mentioned your consulting background
Yeah, just
when
my
you
time at
introduced yourself.
McKinsey. Yeah. So at Liberty Mutual, I was a consultant as well. So I worked in their strategy practice, which worked across the business, but it was always for Liberty. So I saw lots of different things, you know, personal lines, commercial, specialty, US, abroad, et cetera, you know, in all the functional areas. But then I went to McKinsey and spent a couple of years in their P&C practice. So I saw the same sort of variety, but across lots of different carriers. And some pretty amazing, I just say, like, I'm really lucky for the kind of work that I got to do. And I think a part of it is I was an insurance guy working in the insurance practice, and most people don't have that background. So it allowed me to maybe move a little bit faster than I would have otherwise. But yeah, I got to do some really cool stuff and see things that there's no question for me, like, I wouldn't have gotten or been good at my role at Beasley without the role at McKinsey. And I certainly wouldn't have gone to Hiscox and been able to do what I did there without my time at Beasley. So, you know, all of it, it's dominoes that lead to each
Mm-hmm.
other. But consulting was a really solid background that actually ended up paying a ton of dividends in writing this book, because essentially it's a series of case studies. And that's what consulting is. You look at everything as a case and you figure out what's going on with it. What's the story? Where do we take it from here? You know, plus I have an MBA, and you do a lot of case study review in MBAs in business school. So all that really added to bring me to this present moment. But I do think it set me up for the kind of conversations I was having while at Hi Marley with all these carriers that informed the position that I took in the book.
And I think it's important to say that this book reads very different from what you might get from bringing in McKinsey, right?
Yeah,
It's
they're
not.
stories. They're not
It's
dry,
like
but yeah.
this is and I love saying this about insurance nurse books, but it's true. I think about all the ones we published. This is an easy to read book. It's not something that you have to you know take a Saturday and
Yeah.
be the only.
You don't need a
Right,
glossary next to you while you're reading it.
you can read this after work when you're
Yeah.
somewhat tired. Like it's not a hard read.
Yeah.
It's very practical. Is what I'm trying to say. It's a deeply practical. That was my thought going through it. And you
Good.
talked about
That was the
how
intention. So I'm glad.
good,
Yeah.
good, and it's not. it's not a beast like
No.
Bill Wilson's or Rob's,
Yeah.
which are both bulky.
It's a little less
It's
than half the length of Rob's. Mine's like 170. I think Rob's is like 360, 370, something like that. I forget.
so how did you decide more than okay, how do you decide on this format,
Yeah.
which is so different from all the previous ones that
Yeah.
we've done, and actually the previous ones that you've done?
Yeah. Well, so it's funny. I think there's an overlap with my previous books, interestingly. So my other two books are self-help books, and they're self-help books from my perspective. So it's sort of treating me as the case study. It's walking through situations in my life where this idea, this thought, this philosophy came together, and then how was it applied. That's really the same for the future of insurance. So the joke for people who know me from my self-help side, they're like, wait, why'd you write a business book? I'm like, it's still a self-help book. It's just the self is like an insurance company or an industry instead of an individual, or maybe it's the person at the carrier. But the way that I go about it with all my books, it's very similar. Is like the first section is to set up the ideas. Like, well, why are we even here in the first place? What is this all about? And that's what I do. And there's a unique period around disruption that we face in the industry. And I start with looking at the disruption that was going on when I started in the industry in 2000. It was the internet, and the letter E was being appended to everything, and it was exchanges, spelt just with an X. And everyone was like, brokers and agents are done. Everything's going to be these online exchanges. And that's not just in insurance, it was in every space. Like GE had GE Polymer Land that they were advertising on TV for you to like buy and sell plastics and polymers. And do you hear about that anymore? There's like the steel industry invested really heavily, and the auto industry invested really heavily in these like parts and raw materials exchanges. They're all gone today. So insurance wasn't unique in that respect, but it was doomsday from a distribution standpoint. And of course, that didn't happen. There's a lot of facilitation. A lot of that technology carried forward in very different ways than the end of Marsh and Aon and Willis. And you could argue Willis is over, but it's still alive. It's just part of Aon. And Willis back then was a different Willis than it was when Aon bought. So like agents and brokers are still around. And if they're not, it's probably because they're part of someone else who's still around now because of acquisition. But what wasn't going on then, by and large, was a threat to carriers. So you didn't see like 100 new carriers being started up that are purely tech driven. If you saw them, you saw like MGAs or traditional carriers that just happen to be new, but they weren't like clean slate, whole new approach, tech enabled. Fast forward 20 years or 15 years, going back when these things were started, we have a different period of disruption going on. I want to say distribution. There's still a lot of talk about agents and brokers, and a lot of those technologies are to facilitate agents and brokers, not to just flat out replace them. And some who said they'd replace them actually now are like, no, we want to enable them. So the agent and broker channel is still around. There's lots of tools like Hi Marley and some of the others out there that are about facilitating how we deliver insurance. But the really different thing going on right now is tech has now enabled the startup of carriers in a way we've never seen before. And they're not started by like industry veterans who are starting a traditional carrier new. They're tech companies that are using that tech to deal with risk. And there's tons of really cool names out there for all these companies, but like there's a lot of them, and that's totally different. Carriers have not seen that kind of tech-based threat in the past, and that's the context that I wanted to set up before then moving into these stories of carriers that the other thing with writing this book is they're case studies. I could have written them all through press releases and reading articles and just like researching the heck out of it, and that's fine. I did some of that stuff, but I actually wanted to talk to the carriers. I don't want to retell the story that's been told a million times over. I want to hear it from the people who actually worked on each of the things that I talk about, to hear firsthand, like, what did you do? How did you innovate? How did you overcome the barriers you face? Because we all face them. Legacy IT issues and constraints, culture and politics, budget, regulation. Like we have all these constraints that some of those startups don't have. And despite those constraints, and despite a world where we've got all these pressures from the startups and from customers who are demanding very different customer experience than they have in the past, and they're less willing to accept not getting that than they used to be a few years ago, because every other part of their life has moved. Like everyone does everything, and that's a broad statement, but it's kind of true. Everyone does everything much more flexibly, digitally, real time in every other part of their life. And insurance hasn't kept up with that. And that's been the focus for a lot of those startups, is simplifying and digitizing and appifying, Amazonification of everything, right? So how have some of the incumbent carriers actually been able to move the needle despite all that? Those are the
And
stories I wanted to tell.
and carriers are difficult to get them to speak publicly. Like we have a hard time getting carrier people
Yeah.
on the podcast, because like it takes months to get permission internally for them to come on the podcast.
Yeah.
How, and in fact, when I internally at Insurance Nerds, when I first heard that this was your plan for the book, I was very doubtful.
Yeah. You're like, that's great. It'll never happen.
Exactly. How on earth
Yeah.
did you get 7 carriers to play ball and to share stories?
Yeah. Well, so the other reason why I think I was pretty uniquely positioned, and I don't think I'm the only person in the world who could do this, but I was in a fairly rare spot, having been on the carrier and the insurtech side. And to be fair, I was very senior on both sides. So in the leadership team on a carrier, multiple carriers actually over time, and in the leadership team of an insurtech that was well regarded and well received in the industry, because we were an insurance pure play with people who came from insurance. So it felt like we're one of you. So we got in a lot of doors that I think outsiders might have struggled to get into. That means I have a lot of really good relationships. They're people that know that I care about them. I'm trying to help them, and I've been there when they've needed things. It's a lot easier when you're in a sales role at a startup to not just call someone cold, but say, hey, it's Bryan. Remember me? We sat next to each other at the Chief Claims Officer Summit, or we spoke on the same panel at Connected Claims or at Dig, whatever. I was you. I lived in your shoes. Do you have 5 minutes? That's a much easier sale than like, hi, are you struggling with this problem? Well, have I got the answer for you? Like, I'm not just some cold salesperson. I'm that guy that they sat next to at dinner. And that means doors were more likely to be open and people were willing to give me space. And that paid a lot of dividends. So I built some really good relationships. And some of the carriers I was hoping to include, I couldn't. For one, it was because they couldn't say yes, and I totally understand that. A lot of their agents want to put them in books, and they don't do that, and so they felt like, we can't say yes to you and no to our agents. That's not fair to them, which I 100% respect. They would have been a great story. There's others that, like, I didn't have a relationship there. I got to know them through talking about the book. They wanted to do it, but their project was still like pre-pilot, so they wouldn't have had a rich enough story yet. So that just didn't make sense. But actually, I had probably 12 carriers who were ready or interested in doing it. And then it was just a question of, okay, who's far enough along in the journey of this story for that to be a rich enough book? And not to spoil it, but I do think there will be a volume 2, maybe a volume 3, or maybe it's a regular series going on, because there's more stuff going on out there that should be talked about.
Okay, so there were some stories that didn't make it because they're still ongoing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of them are carriers that are in there anyway. So like the State Comp Fund of California, they're in there about their online quote and bind work. That's not the reason I was talking to them, though. It was about a different project.
I thought that one was particularly interesting because the having been a state body for a long time,
Still is.
Exactly. Being
it's a unit of the state of California. They report to the governor.
So yeah. That's innovating in such an environment, needless to say, right? If the rest of us are a little hamstrung by regulation,
yeah,
like imagine that, right? So the fact that they were able to do it, I think that there's if they were able to, every carrier can. So I thought that one was particularly interesting. So what did you learn from? And I know that it's hard to summarize, 100 and
it's
some page book in just a few minutes.
I had to do it for the book. There's 3 main takeaways, and I would just want to call out the other 6 carriers too, because they all gave a lot, and they were pretty honest. And like state comp fund, when I sent the drafts back to the carriers to have a look at to make sure, did I get the facts right? I didn't know this number. Can you fill that in? Whatever. Um, Vern Steiner, the CEO at Skiff, wrote back, and you generally expect like, ooh, you were a little harsh on us here, or like, could you say this differently, or could you strike that because that might upset some people? And the only thing he had to say was, Bryan, overall, this is great, but you missed the mark on something. And I was like, oh no, here we go. And he's like, you were way too easy on us here. He's like, you kind of gave us a pass for failing miserably. He's like, so if people don't know their story, the regulation and the performance in the comp market in California changed dramatically in a very short period of time in the early 2000s. And basically every commercial market pulled out, and Skiff went from like, I forget the shares, it's in the book, but call it 10-15% share to more than half of the state share. They became the
It's
largest comp carrier in the country
yeah, it's an
overnight.
absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, that story, I was blown away by like I can't imagine what try to manage
Yeah.
a
It's
change like
nuts.
that.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
And then, and it's not quality bit, like it's not performing well, because there's a reason why everyone pulled out. I was at Liberty Mutual at the time. We just bought a company called Golden Eagle to grow our comp book in California. And we basically walked away, like we still owned it, but we pulled the plug on comp there. So it was like acquisition for nothing because the book was so bad, like the whole state was so bad. So they're stuck with all that. And then things change, regulation changed. And so the commercial market came back in, and overnight, again, they went from being the largest to like teeny, Vern said the smallest they'd ever been. And it was very heavily in the residual, like market of last resort kind of market versus some of the commercial business that they were able to pick up. And this is the part he said I was too easy on them on. So we didn't lose it just because competitors came back in. We lost it because we didn't deserve to have it in the first place because of how we were servicing it. That's not something you expect a company to approve to go into a book. And that's where I was like, I didn't just get the companies to go along with it. They were really honest. And I think that's a great example, is like Vern was really direct about it. It's like, we were failing. That's why we shrank. If we were doing great, it wouldn't have mattered who came into the market because people would have been happy with us, but they weren't because we weren't doing well enough. So State Comp Fund, we've talked about them. CSA, another California-based company, so that's the largest AAA branded carrier in the country. We have CNA in there, who, you talk about how slow insurers are, and can you get them to say yes to the book? They signed off in 30 minutes of me sending them like the forms to agree to be in it. I had it back from their general counsel in 30 minutes, which is wild. It's a big company. They're like 114 years old. They're exactly what you would expect for like, oh, big. And no, they moved.
I have to get a lot of contracts, a lot of
Yeah.
MSAs in my day job approved by carrier general counsels. Yeah, I have never seen one back
Well, it
in
could be
30
because I was
minutes.
getting in the way with all of mine.
Uh,
That's possible. Yeah, no, that was wild. That was great. And that's because the people I was working with, Rob Thomas there, who's the main person that in that case, was really helpful in stewarding it through. So CSA, Skiff, CNA, Ohio Mutual, that's a relationship that I had built at High Marley. And that's the cases about their work with High Marley. So that one was close to home because I knew a lot about it, and I love the team there. They're incredible. We have employers. So another formerly state comp fund, monoline single state that is now in all 50 states. And they've done some really innovative stuff on the distribution side with their APIs. And incidentally, they used to do comp for Hiscox. We would package their comp in before they had their APIs. And so I saw what it used to look like. And to know where it is today, kudos to them. They did an outstanding job revolutionizing how they work in the digital and alternative distribution space, and they've done well for it. With AXA XL with their construction business. And the last one is the one that everyone's like, you shouldn't even bother because they're not going to say yes. And that was USAA. And that's a different case. It's not a single, like they did this one thing in this place. It's the last case in the book, and it's about changing how you do innovation as a whole. So it's like the innovation of innovation. And the point there is you don't stop. You have to keep looking at how you're even innovating, let alone what's coming out of your innovation engine. So really cool story about the kind of Gen 2 version of innovation that they put in place there a couple of years ago. So those are 7 cases. There's takeaways in each of them, and I pull them out at the end of each case. So you can see, like, you don't have to read all of them. You can jump around. You don't have to read the book chronologically or like in page order. But each one is kind of self-contained with its own lessons. What I wanted to do is pull out like the meta lessons across the whole case and from my own observations of what's going on. And there was 3 themes that really stood out. This is where I think some authors would say, don't give them away because then people won't buy your book. My view is give them away because if it's interesting to people, they'll want to learn more. But I'm about to give away the whole secret sauce of the whole book. So this is the point where you want to listen. So the first is about your customers. So your customers have the answers. And that was a recurring theme in all of the cases. And you see this across the industry where people say they're listening to their customers. They say that, customers want this, but they haven't actually asked, or they're making presumptions about it, or they're frustrated with their customers. And so they're making decisions in response to it. Or maybe it's like, someone senior who had one interaction and then they've made a call. The carriers that really succeed here start with the customer and continue to listen throughout. So you hear that time and time again across the cases, including just in the pilots, like how are we getting feedback? And even though we think this is a great idea, if it's not landing with them, should we really be pushing on it or should we actually make an adjustment? So some very good examples of how to put that into practice across the board, from CSAA, so like personal lines, auto insurance, bread and butter kind of stuff, all the way through to AXA XL in their construction business, which is a highly technical, 9 different lines of business. There's risk engineers involved, really complicated stuff. So if both ends of those, and comp and all the other stuff, but if both ends of those spectrums are doing it, I think you don't really have an excuse to say, well, our business is different. So, we don't really need, or we deal with agents, that's our customer. And then the end customer is their customer. So we can't talk to them. Well, there's agent sourced business in this book as well. And you can't just write off your connection to your end insureds if you have an agent in between you or a broker in between you. You have to know, because you're not serving your agent or broker if you're not serving their customer, because it's just going to land in their lap as a problem. So first and foremost is the customers. You must stay connected to them. That's number 1. Number 2 is your people. So engage with your people. Because I've gotten to see lots of different carriers, I've seen different levels of the claim that I think everybody makes about being a meritocracy and non-hierarchical. Some are, most aren't, or they are to different degrees. And you do see a very consistent theme in all of these stories about the way the staff was engaged with. So you're talking about SCIF being a state entity. It's not just that. They're a state entity with unionized employees who are civil servants. So think about that, like claims adjusters, claims attorneys are in a union. I can't even, I was a head of claims. Like I can't imagine what that would be like. And it's not to put them down. It's just, it's a different structure with constraints, with relationship history. I mean, we think about management versus unions, like there's a history to that. And not speaking to SCIF per se, but like across the board, that's a complication. And you can't just roll out change. The union has to be okay with it. You can't just retrain people or open up new jobs, or the union has to be okay with all of that. So that's a constraint and a complication. So one of the things they did at SCIF that I think is brilliant is they did design thinking training, or design think training. That comes up a few times in a few of the cases. It's a different approach to doing these things. It was really front and center for AXA XL as well. They did it with everybody. And I mean everybody, the entire company, from, every role, union, non-union, didn't matter, executive assistants to adjusters to whoever, went through design think training, went through workshops. They could then all participate in projects, and they did. And they generated ideas, and they came up with something like 30 or 32 innovative ideas for the company. 18 of them, but when I interviewed them, I don't know, a couple months ago, 18 of them were either done or in process. That's a crazy hit rate for new ideas. So they literally had their entire organization. And Vern he's like, we had to be thoughtful about how we engage with our people because of the unique relationship and the structure being civil servants and unions and a state entity. And they have to even think about what other state entities are doing or not doing, and can they stand out or not. There's a lot of considerations. Because like the reality is we would have engaged with them like this anyway. We didn't do it because they were union and we needed to be careful. We did it because they're our people and we needed to engage with them. And you hear that across the board: Ohio Mutual, AXA XL, USA. I mean, it goes on in every single case. You can't do this without your people, because they're the ones living it. They're the ones talking to the customers. They're the ones who may have an outside idea you will never come up with on your own. So that was really critical. So it's the people outside the organization, it's the people inside. And that is, I think, the easiest one to fake, because I've seen it. I've seen carriers pat themselves on the back for being innovative and about their people. And now we're open floor plan. It's like, you are, except for people of a certain level and above, because I've worked at carriers like that, and they praise themselves for their floor plan and how open they are. But everyone who's, VP and up has an office, and they're the only ones who get to make decisions. And they're the only ones who get to ask tough questions, if that. So I think that's one where the change may be the hardest, maybe harder than talking to your customers, but it's the most necessary. And it's going to take an appetite to break through that. And you hear in a number of the cases the CEO doing just that and why it was so important. So I think that's another area of inspiration from the cases that we can all take. So that's the second one.
I I I thought it was very interesting with California one, that there were things in the application that they were trying. Right, they had this application that had, I can't remember how many questions.
Small,
like
it was like
60
80,
questions,
80 something questions. Yeah.
So something crazy like that, and they were trying to lower that, and they successfully lowered it to very few.
So,
and I thought it was very interesting that some of the questions were not for them.
Right.
It was a.
So they asked a licensing question that actually has nothing to do. Yeah, because another state entity would need the license information, which, by the way, they were getting anyway.
It was a courtesy to a different organization. Yeah.
And they were losing business over it and annoying customers over it. Yeah. We all have that, right? Every carrier has something that's like, the question's there because it's always been there. And
it's not used for an underwriting decision. It's not used for a pricing decision.
Right.
It's not gonna. It's like we should refer to those as the closed door question, because of elevators, where the closed door button doesn't do anything.
Oh man, you just broke my heart. That's like my favorite button. Yeah, no, that's very true.
So, well, what's the third takeaway?
So the third takeaway is this one. Actually, I think there's a piece of me that was speaking to all the fellow insurtech folks out there. So this is the other side of my career coming out, but it's about focus, and it's so important for carriers. Like, as you get in these projects and you see the ones that are really innovation machines, they do these very specific, guided, focused approaches. XXL really talks about this heavily. They call them RRIs. It's results. Now I'm going to blank on what it stands for. It stands for RRI, Rapid Results Initiative. That's what it is. Okay. It's basically a 90-day design, think through execution approach. And it's how they do everything. It's how they come up with ideas. It's how they implement them. It's how they do pilots, and they bring their customers in on it too. And it's super focused, and it's binary. Either it works or it doesn't work. And if it works, then you go on to the next one to move it further. And if it doesn't work, then you look for something else. It's not about like, okay, we're going to do this thing over here. And like, you start in on it's, ooh, and here's another interesting thing. And, oh, well, we want to add on this other thing. We heard about this. This came up with employers where they're building their APIs to do quote and bind with some of their new distribution partners or existing ones, but new way of distributing. And someone's like, oh, we see your API. We'd like you to customize it because we want to do this thing over here. It's really easy. And insurtech should be listening to this. It's really easy when you get asked by someone who could be a source of revenue for you to be like, oh yeah, we can customize it. Sure. We'll change what we're doing a little bit, or like, we'll go down that rabbit hole. And what happens? You get taken off path timelines extend, budget extends, scope never lives up to what you said it was going to be, and you end up frustrated. And this is the historic path of innovation in our industry. And Agile made it better, but it didn't make it go away. It still happens. So the key is you need to stay open. You need to hear about these other ideas. But I love the way employers did it is they take those ideas. They don't just say no, but they take it to all of their API users and everyone who they're in flight with that's not using it yet. And they say, this is a request we got. Is this of value to you or not? And if the answer is universally yes, they will build it. They'll slot it in and they'll build it. If the answer is no, or it's mixed, what they realize is we haven't fully understood the request. So we're not just going to jump on this. We need to go back and do more work, or maybe let them flesh it out. Because your customer's asking for it one way. They may not understand the way that it should be built, but they're telling you like, we need a button that's, I love this. When I was at Beasley, we were building a system and one of the underwriters was like, we're like, oh, you can send the quote yourself. It's great. Like, you're doing the underwriting anyway. You don't need to then forward everything to your underwriting assistant and have them send it. You just send it out. He said, oh, can I have a button that doesn't send it out, but sends it to the UA to send it out? It's like, you want a button that tells someone to press a button? And he's like, yeah, can you do that? No, we could have listened and done that. And then UAs would have a task that's like press button and they go press the button and the job's done. Or we could just be like, okay, why are you asking that? Well, I don't want the email to come from me because then the broker's going to come back to me with all their questions. And some of it's really like the UA should be handling that because it's like, oh, can you change this option or change the spelling or whatever? Okay, well, what if we let you press the button and it goes out, only it goes out from the UA's email address and their name? Oh, okay, that's fine. But if you listen to them up front, they just told you like, give me a button that tells someone to press a button. You build the wrong thing. It's complicated. It makes people unhappy and it takes too long. So you got to stay focused and you take in the feedback, but if it's not going to resonate across the board, then either it's a distraction you shouldn't go down or you need to understand it better and you haven't pressed them enough. But in either case, you shouldn't be building it right now. So that's where focus really comes in. And for startups, like shiny object syndrome is so dangerous. And every carrier you talk to will have a different take on things and will ask you for something different. And it's really hard to say no to that because it could be your survival. You're looking at your runway, you're worried about how, and it's like, oh, but if we get this deal that buys us 4 more months before we have to raise, I totally get that. I've lived in that. But it can also be the end of your company. So you have to know how to manage those requests to make sure you understand them and they truly have value, or it's just, kind of a flight of fancy for someone.
So overall, this is a deeply practical.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's very interesting. The more I think about it, it's kind of it definitely builds on, and you even mentioned that it builds on the shoulders of Rob Galbraith's book.
Yeah.
But Rob's is a very hypothetical book. This one's a deeply practical book, right? Rob's academically looking at kind
Yes.
of what might happen and why.
Yeah.
And he does a great job on that. This one is a deeply practical. This is how they succeeded, specific companies.
Yeah.
If I run a business unit at a carrier, can I just copy and paste for one of the
You
cases for
can.
success?
Well, so here's the thing, Tony, and this is what I think some people might be like, okay, here's 7 cases on these 7 themes. So if I have one of the, like CNA is about their work in fraud with Shift Technology. So if I'm looking at solving for fraud, I just pick up the book, I look at the CNA case, and that's my answer. It could be, but that doesn't mean that that's the right answer for you. The issue or the takeaway is not the tech. Like none of those 3 things that I mentioned, customers, your people, focus, none of those is a technology. So this isn't a book that's like, and if you want to go with cloud, here's the way you do it. And if you want
Yeah,
APIs,
you're not prescribing
no,
a
because
specific solution.
right, because they change and because there's lots of different tools that may be right for one carrier and not another. So it's not about any one technology. It's not about any one case. It's about the lessons and how to go about it. Now, what you might have is, we're facing these constraints. Oh, I see this carrier who I never really would have thought of as an analog for me. They're in the book and they have some of those same, like AXA XL. They were XL when it started and then became XL Catlin in part of the process. And like, actually, that was one of the feedback points from their general counsel when she read the book was like, we need a consistent way to refer to us. So just call us XXL, but then you need a disclaimer, and it was very legalese. So we toned it down a little bit, but like they changed their name and their structure and ultimately became owned by a company in France that doesn't write their lines of business, all in the course of the story. So like maybe that's what you're going through. Maybe you suddenly got acquired in the midst of this, but your business is staying on, and you need to think about how to move forward with a new ownership from a different country that has, different lines of business that they care about, and all of that. Like maybe there's complications that, or constraints or pressures that one of those carriers face that is similar to yours, even though their case is about something totally different. So yes, you can look at, like, if you're thinking about texting, I would hope, because I love Hi Marley, I would hope that you would just copy what Ohio Mutual did, and you can, it's very easy, but it's more important to look at the situation and see if that story resonates and why, more so than any one technology.
Okay. Um, so how do we get our hands on the book?
So the book is available, either totally available or for pre-order, depending when people listen to this. And it's available across the board. So, most people will get their books from Amazon. You can get it in Kindle, you can get it in print, you can get it on Audible. That went live as we're recording this, actually. And it's at Barnes & Noble and Apple Books. It's everywhere. So you can find it in the platform that you like, and you can get it there, or you can just go to future-of-insurance.com and you can learn more about the book. You can see some of the reviews on it, and I have a link to all the major ways that you can buy it there. And I also sell copies myself that I will personally sign and send out if people are interested in that kind of thing too.
So with COVID going on, no in-person hangout or
Yeah.
launch right now, but if I'm not mistaken, you are doing
Still doing a launch. Yeah. So the books, I was supposed to be doing one of the keynote addresses at Connected Claims in Chicago this summer. I'm still doing that, but it's not going to be in Chicago unless you happen to be in Chicago watching it on their platform. But Connected Claims is still going on virtually. It's actually free now, which is awesome, because it's a fairly expensive conference to attend, but it's really good. So and I actually have a link for people if they wanted to go to register for it. Again, it's free, and I'm doing a talk on the book. Still figuring out exactly what kind of launch activity we're doing, maybe a little virtual happy hour kind of thing.
there's an opportunity there to interact.
Yeah, do some Q&A, let's talk about it. Maybe I'm hopefully going to have some of the people who are in the book join me, so that, you can hear from the horse's mouth about some of the stuff. But it'd be great. And I hope people join. And it's the kind of thing you could drop in and drop out, so you don't have to hang out and talk insurance all night long, but we can, if that's what people want. But my consulting practice is called Insurance Evolution Partners. At that website, there's a link for Connected Claims. It's insurance-evolution.com/connected claims. That'll take you right through to the registration. And that's June 24th is when the book comes out. And my talk will be the afternoon of the 23rd.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about the insurance consulting practice before we sign off?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the other thing that was born of the year that I spent at Hi Marley, and the kind of two sides to my life, carrier and then InsurTech, is these conversations. I think carriers need some help with it. So, I was naturally starting to get into those kind of discussions with carriers. So, put the practice together, but essentially I'm here to advise and consult for carriers who are thinking about innovation, about solutions, about maybe a pressure that they're facing. Like Ohio Mutual's case is a great example. Customers were asking them for a decade to text with them, and they kept trying, and they couldn't make it work until at last they did. Like, maybe you're facing something like that, and you need someone fresh perspective who's seen other things at different carriers and across the industry to talk to about that. That's where I can come in and help you figure that out. And because I'm a claims guy, also doing some work with carriers on their claims organizations and helping those move forward. And then also advising some insurtechs. So my goal ultimately is to help carriers do better, and that includes helping carriers directly or those who are committed to serving them. So that's what my focus is about. Keeping our industry moving forward, very much what the insurance nerds are about. We got to have a thriving industry for all the future insurance professionals to go work in.
Oh, we will. I have absolutely no doubt.
Yes.
That we will. But it would be nice if it was modernized and
Trying, Tony.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. And if you're a carrier side or a insurtech side leader, I think that engaging Bryan might be one of the easiest sales you ever do internally, because it's bringing in a former McKinsey guy who also ran business units at a couple of carriers.
Yeah.
So kind of the best of both worlds.
Cool. Thank you. And
And
I won't even send creepy emails about looking at you and your computer. We'll just keep it really friendly.
So the podcast goes live next Monday.
Okay.
And when does the book itself go live?
So the book will be live on the 24th. So the Wednesday after, or Wednesday, week and a half later. Yeah.
Perfect. So if you're listening to this the day that it comes out, pre-orders are up. And if you're listening to this anytime after that, you can probably get your hands right on it. Thank you very much, Bryan, for joining us today, and for choosing to publish this with Insurance Nerds.
Thank you guys for the support.
I'm very, very proud of our stable of books. Thus far, they have all been fantastic, and this one is also. So we're very, very happy to be tied up with to be connected with this book. I never thought that we would be doing stuff with specific stories, like with Carrier Blessing. Being able to name names is a really cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. The stories aren't good enough if they're all genericized and Carrier X, and if you're not willing to be open about it, I fully respect that, but then it's not worth putting in the book. So I think it's great that we were able to get what we did.
So from what I've seen, this is unique. This is almost a new subgenre within the small genre of insurance books. I haven't seen any others that are quite that are case based with names and last names and everything. So really cool. I hope we see more.
Yeah, me too. No,
awesome.
It's been great. It's been great to do this.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Tony.